Okay, let's take a look at Legion of Honor. This is a new Napoleonic card game from Clash of Arms. In typical Clash of Arms fashion, the production quality is impeccable. You can see it's got kind of the, you can do it without the sunlight blowing out the camera. Got kind of the linen finished box with embossed decor, I guess you could call it, which, you know, is really nice when wargamers can kind of pay attention to those elements of production quality. You know, all too often most war games are from companies that can barely even publish a single game. You know, it's not much more than a couple of guys running a publishing business out of their garage. When you open up the box, the first thing you see is this big period era kind of like orders sheet. You know, since the game is basically a role-playing game where you are a officer in, I think that it starts at sergeant, but you work your way up into the officer ranks essentially in Napoleon's Grand Army. In the early years of the Napoleonic era. And so you get this kind of, you know, to set the theme, you get this two arms kind of intro to the game in a Napoleonic document style. Just kind of a nice touch. Just, you know, another thing that showing Clash of Arms taking steps here that a lot of wargame publishers don't take. With the game itself, there's no use of a map or anything like that. Everything is done with cards, which I've got kind of laid out over here, and I'll go into more in a second. Otherwise, you're just tracking everything on charts. Here, I am running a 4-player game solo. You can play up to 6 players or even more, but there are a limited number of these tracking sheets, which are called grognard sheets, included with the game. In fact, the game comes with one of these grognard sheets. As an alternative to the grognard sheets, the game comes with something called a ledger sheet, which has all of the same information on the grognard sheets, but you don't use counters like you do here. The game came with counters to use to track things on the grognard sheets, which you can see are kind of in typical, any type of counting counter usually has the, you know, the times 10, times 100, times 1 counters that you use to keep track of the various elements of your character in the game as you play. The ledger sheet just offers an alternative way to do that, which is instead of using counters to track numbers, you actually write everything down. Which seems a lot more tedious to me, so that's why I ended up using these grognard sheets. And originally, the game contents description says there are 6 grognard sheets and 1 ledger sheet. What you actually get are 6 of these ledger sheets and 1 grognard sheet. I'm not sure exactly why Clash of Arms swapped these out at the last minute. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The rules list the ledger sheet as if you have more than 6 players, just have them use one of these ledger sheets to write down the information, as opposed to using the grognard sheet to keep track of everything. Well, personally, I find the grognard sheet much easier to use than the ledger sheet. Also, you know, why would you? The grognard sheet is actually printed on, and that's not the original. I had to make copies. The original's here. It's actually printed on heavy cardstock, which is good for something that you're using as a tracking grid with counters. Whereas the ledger sheet's just a piece of paper that you would write on and throw away when you're done. So that's something that you would always photocopy. So why put in 6 copies of that? Just put 1 in, and people can make photocopies whenever they want to use it. Put in 6 of the grognard sheets because nobody's writing on that. Those would be used all the time. So I don't know if it was just Clash of Arms cutting corners and not wanting to pay for 6 additional color cards or 5 additional color cardstock versions of the grognard sheet, or what, but I had to go to Kinko's and make color copies onto cardstock of the grognard sheets. I had to make 5 of those So, there's another $6 spent just getting the game up to something that's playable with 6 players. I think the Clash of Arms had said, oh, well, you can just track everybody's info on one Grognard sheet because it's all public info. Well, there's no way you could fit 6 players worth of these counters on here. This is just one player's counters on here on this Grognard sheet tracking their numbers. Now, can you imagine 6 other sets of those counters on one of those sheets? No, you'd have giant stacks of counters. It'd be impossible just to even know who is where and keep track of what without knocking stuff over or getting somebody else's counter moved to the wrong space. So just a mess. So you're just going to have to make extra... If you want to use the counters in the game, you're going to have to make 5 copies of this Grognard sheet. Otherwise, if you don't want to use the counters, everybody can just write their stuff down on a spreadsheet, which I think is a lot less, or a lot more tedious for one thing, and a lot less interesting visually, and in my opinion, a lot less easier to keep track of visually than just tracking stuff on your counter sheets. Certainly, playing solo and tracking a number of different characters, I prefer to use the Grognard sheets. So, it's something everybody will have to decide for themselves what they want to do. So basically, when you set up a character to play in the game, everybody's going to be, we'll start out roughly in the same position. There's, you first off figure out your assignment, and there's this here, the assignment sheet, which will show which campaign season you're in. The game's divided into 16 campaign seasons. Each campaign season has a number of different events that occur in it, and that's where the card play will come in. But at the start of each campaign season, in this case we're in the first campaign season, every player rolls a die to see what army they're going to be part of. So in this case, 2 of the players are in the Army of Italy, and then there's 1 in the Army of the North, and 1 in the Army of the Center. And where your command is will have an effect on whether certain cards apply to you or not. Certain battle cards, only certain of these armies take part in. For example, in the first season, the Battle of Valmy is one of the battles that occurs, and that's Army of North and Army of Center. If you have soldiers like these guys over here in the Army of Italy, they won't actually take part in that battle and won't get any of the benefits or risks that are on those cards. And there are other cards besides the battles that may rely on what your command is as to whether or not you take part in the actions on the card. So that's one of the first things you do. So the assignment sheet is something that'll be sitting out that everybody can see, so everybody knows where everybody else is in terms of the game. Here you've got the fair sex sheet. This is an optional rule of having women in the game for the players to court and or marry. And again, certain card plays will affect the what the characters can do with the women in the game and how they interact with them. One of the attributes, and if you can see here on the Grognard sheet, all the characters have different attributes here. You've got their rank and whatever command they're in. Napoleon's Notice, Glory, Experience, Money, Health, Charm, Fencing, and Standing. Charm is what will affect your influence with the fair sex, whether you can successfully court a woman, successfully marry a woman, and so forth. And then once you are either courting a woman or married, then one of the elements of the game will be having to support financially your spouse or mistress. So that's another one that we'll be sitting out and keeping track of. Currently there's no women in the game in the first campaign season. There haven't been established any women. That's something that happens in the earlier turn sequence of subsequent seasons. And so there's a number of other sheets here, and again, there's no board, no map or anything for this game. Everybody's just tracking their info on their Grognard sheet, tracking where they are on the command sheet, and then there's a number of other charts that are included. There's the rules summary sheet here, which I'll get to the rules in a minute. They're their own whole discussion. Here's a battle command sheet, and this is something that you would use to determine outcomes of battles in the game, and that sort of thing. So I haven't actually done any of this stuff yet. I did one of the battles that didn't actually utilize, in this case, enemy orders or those kinds of things. So no sort of contested battle type order things yet. Here's a history sheet that just explains the history of the different fixed campaign and garrison event cards that occur throughout the game. So it's just kind of like historical notes. Here's the fate sheet, and this kind of has it's got the wound table, which is important for players that are in duels or in battles or things like that, where they can end up potentially getting wounded. That'll determine whether your guy gets knocked out for a turn, essentially. But getting wounded has certain other benefits that come with it in terms of glory and experience. So then you can see there's a number of other charts on here, and this is generally, it says fate sheet, but this is generally sort of the like sequence of play chart and things like that, like a catch-all for charts that you'll use frequently to get the lady quality table on there. The bourbon persecution chart. And then down here you've got the organization of play chart, and this organization of play in the game takes some getting used to, mainly because it's organized horribly in the rules. But essentially each turn, or campaign season really, is organized into these three phases. So you got the campaign season segment where you do the fair sex phase, that's all the dealings with the women in the game. Your money transfer and tax phase, that's where you can move money. You have your money in two places. You either keep it in Paris in your accounts or on your person in your purse. And so during that phase is when you can transfer money from Paris to your purse or vice versa, and then get taxed on any money that you keep in a bank in Paris. There's the aging phase where people's health will be affected. Your health starts at a certain point and then decreases as you age or get wounded, etc. Throughout the game. And then the glory phase, where you assess the glory that you've earned for the turn, see if there's promotions and things like that. After the campaign season segment, you've got the in-garrison rounds, which is where you determine who the senior grognard is, and that will be just the guy who goes first, or sets the turn order, basically, for the turn. And that will just be the senior ranking grognard. If you have equally ranked grognards, you kind of go down the list of their attributes until you find somebody who's higher, and he becomes the senior grognard. So there you've got the recovery phase, the income phase, the support phase, and the deck phase. And the deck phase is where the actual play of the game really happens in terms of the cards. And then the in-garrison phase then is where you'll actually do the actions and stuff in the in-garrison in the deck. The deck's just where you build the deck. And then you've got the on-campaign rounds, which are, again, recovery and health phase, income, support, deck phase, on campaign phase. And so the in-garrison rounds are where you're in garrison in whatever command you're in, and the cards will reflect that in terms of your activities. On campaign is where you'll be taking place in battles and things like that, and again the cards will reflect that also. That's where you'll be marching or in bivouac or wherever else. In garrison you'll be training or working or doing other things to earn money or what have you. But each of these rounds involve, you collect your income, and then you pay out any support you need to do, and then there's recovery for people who are wounded, or at the beginning of each phase, if you were taken prisoner in a combat or something like that, you'll be released and allowed then to participate in further rounds. And essentially that's the game. You'll do that, you'll just repeat these phases through each of the campaign seasons that are noted on the assignment sheet here. So, and then there's a additional, here's the opportunity sheet, which I think just explains how each of the cards, the particular campaign season event cards work here. On the campaign season sheet, this shows you each campaign season. So the first campaign season is the Brunswick Manifesto, looking at 1792. And you'll see these like 1-1, 1-2, 1A, 1B. Each round the deck will include one of those cards. So for the 1-1, that's the in-garrison campaign round 1. You put that card in along with then 3 cards for each grognard that's playing in the game. So in this case, I'm running a 4-player game. So there's a deck of 12 cards plus that 1/1 card, which is the in-garrison event card for that round. So that's 13 cards in the deck. Each player draws a card in sequence, resolves the activities on that card until you reach an end of round card or you run out of cards. Then you go through your sequence of income, support, so forth, and then do the next round, which will be the 1/2 card plus 12 cards of the in-garrison event deck. And that will be the second round of the first campaign season, the second in-garrison round. And then you'll move to the on-campaign round, and there you'll have one round with event card A, and then another round with event card B. And you will essentially do that depending on how many cards you've got in each campaign season. So you can see later on, the second campaign season, pretty much the same thing. You'll have 2 rounds of each. You'll have 2 in-garrison rounds and 2 on-campaign rounds. Then when you move on to the third one, you can see you'll have 3 in-garrison rounds and 2 on-campaign rounds. So playing through the cards, then the events on each card will indicate how your character advances in terms of glory, experience, money, and so forth and so on. So you can see here, just taking a look at the cards, I've got them split out. Here are the unplayed in order in-garrison event cards, and then the on-campaign event cards. Those are the ones that will be mixed in. Usually the on-campaign event cards, as you can see here, are usually going to be battles. And then the garrison here, you can see Louis the 16th guillotine. So there are going to be different types of things for each different season, portion of the season that you're in. And then there's a mix then of, in these decks, these are where you'll create your draw cards. And these are going to be more generic things that we'll just have, you can see here. This will be like, this would drop your glory by 2 and your charm by 1. So each person that draws whatever card will just follow the events for that particular card, depending. And you'll see here this is broke down by line, field, and general. Early in the game, everybody's going to be a line officer. As people start to get promoted, you'll be a field officer, and then maybe even a general eventually in this. So you'll, depending on where you are in rank, you'll use that particular guide to determine what happens to your character. So as you can see here is a line character, and this is on your on-campaign event. You're probing the enemy here. So if you're a line officer, the W means you have a chance to end up being wounded, which a 4 means essentially 40. So you roll a 2d10, and if you roll lower than 40, your guy gets wounded. You roll higher than 40, and he's fine. And then P is prisoner here. If you roll essentially a 10 or lower, you become a prisoner. Anything higher, you're fine, and you get experience plus 1. So that's how essentially all these cards work. They may have a little bit more detail on them. Some of them involve, like, you may get in a duel or something, or have to duel somebody, or it may be restricted to certain people and certain commands acting on the cards. But that's basically the meat of each campaign or in-garrison round that you go through. People will just draw those cards until the event gets played and somebody draws an end-of-round card, then the round ends immediately. And you move on. One of the other things that can happen, there's 2 other decks here. There's the combat deck, which determines what happens to you during fighting. So, just a typical example here. Unit flanked. So if you're a line officer, you can choose either an act of glory, which is to turn and face the enemy, or an act of discretion, find a better position. Basically what that means is if you choose the act of glory, you have a chance of getting wounded or taken prisoner, but you get these full points. In this case, you'd get glory plus 5 and experience plus 3, although not so good because you only get Napoleon's notice 0 and money 0, so usually you want something that gives you a little money or Napoleon notice. If you choose the act of discretion, you only get half the amount of Napoleon's notice, glory, experience, and money. And then you have to roll to see if you're potentially disgraced. So, which would not be good. Again, changes depending on whether you're in a field position or general position. So the battle cards will each be like this. So when one of these battles happens in the on-campaign event, each person will go around and draw one of these cards to determine what they do during that particular battle. And again, a particular battle is only going to involve people in certain armies. So not everyone may be taking part in a battle each turn. It just depends on what command they're in at the time. The other deck here is the duel deck, and essentially this is just like dueling cards. You play cards, this is for pistols, there's one for swords too. You play cards that are essentially lunge, parry, or riposte, and you play them against each other, each card countering the other card's actions, with the result going to the person who plays the card that succeeds in either wounding or well, not killing. You can only get killed if you roll badly on your wound chart and your health gets down to 0. And your health starts at like 90 something, so everybody's pretty healthy at the start because they're young and vigorous. But duels and things can wound you, and essentially it's just whoever goes first has the advantage if he has enough of the right kind of card in his hand. If you just keep lunging and the other guy keeps parrying and he eventually runs out of parry cards and has nothing but lunge cards left, if you play another lunge card and he has to lunge back at you, you win because despite him lunging back at you, you've struck first. So that's the duel system is pretty simple, and then you just resolve, whether you're wounded, and then what kind of glory or experience you get out of it. So every time you fence with swords, you get a little bit better. As your fencing score gets better, you can increase the number of cards that you get to have in your hand during a duel. So that could give you an advantage. If you've got more cards in your hand than your enemy, you've got a better potential of having more cards than he does that will end up inflicting damage, which is your ultimate goal. So promotions in the game work through getting Napoleon's Notice, Glory, and Experience. It's usually going to be some combination of the three. Early in the game, because you're just a sergeant or a sous lieutenant, you are not. It doesn't count Napoleon's Notice until campaign season 6 as being a requirement for promotion. So basically you're going to focus on getting experience and glory to get your promotions early on. And I don't know if it says on there. Sorry, I'm trying to zoom in, looking through the screen here to see if it shows what you need to reach that rank. So to reach the rank of lieutenant, you need 50 glory. You need 50 glory and 45. No, I'm sorry. All right, I'm just gonna have to zoom out and actually physically look at what this says, and let that be a lesson that they can probably print that. Probably could have printed that larger. So you need to become a lieutenant. You need 50 glory and 45 experience. When you get up to something like colonel, you can see where you start to need Napoleon's Notice in there to get that promotion. And what you can end up doing is, if you're a little bit short on one and not the other, you can kind of swap them around. You can substitute Napoleon's Notice for glory or experience for glory, but not usually on a one-for-one basis. It's going to cost you a little bit more to pad one with stats from somewhere else in order to get that promotion. But that's essentially what you're trying to do throughout the game. In a very role-playing aspect, you're trying to buff your stats in order to get up to the next level. And then I haven't actually. I've played one turn, or I've played the first campaign season, but I haven't gotten into anything like their office title or Legion of Honor. And you can't really win those things or attain those things early in the game because you're too young and green. But those things will come into play later in the game, although I can't really explain them because I've not yet read about them. So that's just sort of a quick overview of how the game works. It took a little bit of getting used to the rules. Unfortunately, it took a long time for me just to figure out what the sequence of play was and where everything goes, because it lists out your sequence of play for the campaign season phase and then how the income, each of these things works, but it doesn't explain how they actually work in the game in a very easy to follow sequence. Talks about here's your determining the senior grognard in garrison rounds, on campaign rounds. Here is where, buried in this deep in this dense wall of text here, it tells you how to build the deck. and actually play the cards in each garrison round and on campaign round. And it took me a while to even understand that you do separate rounds for each different numeraled card in your either in garrison events or on campaign events. So like the first time I went through, I had both the 1/1 card and the 1/2 in garrison event cards in the same deck, and then realized, oh, I think you're just supposed to have one in there and then do a round for each season period, I guess. It's even now, like, I'm not sure exactly how to describe it. This idea of, and it's kind of, again, split between two different sections. So you've got your in-garrison rounds and your on-campaign rounds, and then I thought, oh, okay, so there's one round for each. But then it describes in here repeat this procedure for subsequent in-garrison rounds within the campaign season until all these rounds are played. That's the only part that where I figured out that, oh, so there's more than one round within a season. So very confusing to me. And again, the rules are just kind of like that, where everything is scattered and not in very not in an intuitive, like each, like your rank and your Napoleon's Notice, what all these things mean is all in its own encapsulated section, and you don't really learn how they relate to each other or the flow of the game itself, which is very, very difficult for me to grasp these rules and going through them. So, but I think I've got the handle of it now, and have determined that, okay, so this is actually how the game plays, which, believe me, it took several readings of the rules before I could even start to come to terms with where the cards fit in and everything like that. So the rules could be a little bit better, but it's all in there. It's just split up in the weirdest way possible. So we'll play a couple more rounds and then see where the game's going from there.